thought it was appropriate to ask this question. No, I don't think it's going to be an issue, but I thought it would be somewhat appropriate to address that. And I presume you're saying that you don't think it'll be...
I certainly wouldn't have to go all that.
Okay.
And I can't imagine it's going more than an hour.
Okay, I just needed some idea. Then with that representation, I'm not going to limit anybody's closing. I don't like to do that. That's not my preference, but I thought it was appropriate to have some sort of conversation with regard to that. Mr. Moore?
On an unrelated note, are the court expecting counsel to remain at the podium?
Not, you know, I'm not really, I don't really limit that either, but with all due respect, you know, I don't want you to get too close to the jurors, so.
Well, I'm thinking I don't like the walking over to the defense table and pointing and waving arms and faces, that sort of thing. So I just assume the court sets levels there.
I haven't really had an issue with that either. I don't, who's doing the closing on behalf of the defense?
Judge will be the state will be splitting.
I mean, on behalf of the state, I'm sorry.
Judge will be splitting. I'm not going to walk over. I may, from the podium, obviously point to the defense table, but I'm not going to walk over, stay right in front of the podium. My expectation is, you know, I don't necessarily stay directly behind the podium. I'll move out to the side a little bit, but I'm not going to be, you know, walking up to the jurors. So
Okay.
I'll be kind of within that radius.
Okay. I mean, I've had Mr. anticipate do that. I don't. Up until then. You say I don't even notice it. That's. I'll go like this if I hear too much noise. For some reason, it doesn't bother me out here. It's the noise right here bothers me. They do something I don't get that close to that. But you know, when I get tired, I start adding EDs and INGs, places where they don't go, so I gotta make sure I gotta really concentrate not to do that. I even ate oatmeal this morning. I get something warm on my throat.
All rise for jury.
seated. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Has anyone read or been exposed to reading newspaper headlines and/or articles relating to this trial or its participants? No. Has anyone seen or heard television, radio, or internet comments about this trial? No. And have you read any news headlines or articles relating to this trial or its participants? No. Has anyone conducted or been exposed to any research regarding any matters concerning this case? No. And have you discussed this case among yourselves or with anyone else, or allowed anyone to discuss it in your presence? No. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, both the state and the defense have now rested their case. The attorneys now will present their final argument. Please remember that what the attorneys say is not evidence or your instruction on the law. However, do listen closely to their arguments. They are intended to aid you in understanding the case. Each side will have equal time, but the state is entitled to divide their time between an opening argument and a rebuttal argument after the defense has spoken. Okay, closing argument on behalf of the state.
Please, the court, counselors. Members of the jury. What this case is about is on March 6, 2012, when Deputy Pill walked up to the vehicle being driven by this defendant, Brandon Bradley, and she was within 2 feet of him. He pulled out his loaded gun and shot her dead. 8 shots, 1 to the head, a fatal wound. As we told you in opening statement, this is about what she didn't know. What Deputy Pill didn't know when she made the stop of Brandon Bradley. She didn't know who was the driver. You hear that on her video. She didn't know because the car, that SUV that he bought a few weeks ago, he never transferred the title. So that tag doesn't come back to him. You saw in the pictures the last information that she has, that she looked at before she died, before she was murdered. Her in-camera screen telling her stolen property. That's what she knew. What she didn't know was that Brandon Bradley was a wanted man. You've seen the warrants, the DOT warrants, the bench warrants. She didn't know this. The car's not his name. She didn't know he was a wanted man, but he knew it. He knew it. Heard all the evidence that he knew. She didn't know that he had said he's not going back to prison. She didn't know that he said he would do whatever it takes not to go back to prison. She didn't know that he's telling Andrea Kirchner, she saw my tag, she saw my face, I've got to kill the cracker. She didn't know he was having that discussion or argument with Andrea Kirchner. She didn't know Andrea Kirchner was begging for her life, for Deputy Pill's life. Telling Brandon Bradley, you don't need to do this, baby. You don't need to do this. Deputy Pill didn't know that. What Deputy Pill sadly didn't know, most importantly, was that Brandon Bradley had the loaded gun, 10-shot magazine into this firearm, locked and loaded. She didn't know he had this within his reach. ultimately having it within his hand, and was ready for there. Ready to kill the cracker to avoid going back to prison. Those were the facts that sadly Deputy Hill did not know walking up to that vehicle. You got to see the last steps that she took in her life before this defendant pointed that firearm and fired 8 shots from a distance of less than within 2 feet, striking her numerous times, and once in the head, killing her. Members of the jury, facts and evidence in this case, I submit to you, prove overwhelmingly and beyond any reasonable doubt this defendant is guilty of first-degree murder, the robbery, including resisting of violence. I'm going to go through the facts, ladies and gentlemen, with you. I'm going to cover first what you're going to see in the instructions. The law is in this case. I'll go through the facts with you and hopefully demonstrate to you how the state's proven each and every element of the charges that we charge this defendant with. As I go through these instructions, I have a stack of them I'm going to cover with you, but as the court told you early on, these are in a printed form. She's going to give the set to you. You each have, when you go back to the jury room, I believe, perhaps when she gives them to you. But you're going to have them with you. So you don't need to take notes. Just speak. To answer the questions below. A, guilt. Answer B, charge the firearm. Yes, cause death. then read the deputy killed. Talk with voir dire, weighing the evidence. Burden of proof is the court's going to be use a reasonable doubt. We talked about juries, the difference between a reasonable doubt versus impossible doubt, speculative, forced or imaginary. There's that difference, that test of reasonability. Talk about weighing the evidence. The court's going to give you instruction on that, give you some guidelines to look at. But a couple of things I want to remind you and cover with you right off the bat. Second sentence in this instruction, you should use your common sense in deciding which is the best evidence. You go back to that jury, you don't suddenly leave behind your life experiences and your common sense, your history that makes up who you are, how you've had to make decisions your entire life. You use that life experience to go back and evaluate the testimony. What's going to tell you, you decide you may believe or disbelieve any or all part of any witness. Everything the witness said, none of what they had to say, or some of what they had to say. It's your choice. I encourage you to use your common sense in your own path. The court also gave you a couple of instructions during the trial. She's going to read those to you again. Voluntary intoxication, mental condition, and the defendant's statement. What she told you was voluntary intoxication. Voluntary intoxication resulting from the use of it is not a defense to a crime, period. It's not a defense to say, hey, I was doing too many drugs. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't form it because I was. That's not a defense. You don't get to go out and do all the drugs you want to do and then suddenly say, this is a shield. I'm not guilty. I didn't have an intent. Evidence of the defendant's voluntary intoxication may not be taken into consideration to show that he lacked the specific intent of any crime. It's not a defense. You cannot consider it for a defense at all. It only goes to considering the voluntariness of the defendant's statement. That's it. Mental condition. Evidence of an abnormal mental condition is not a defense to any crime. Evidence of a defendant's abnormal mental condition may not be taken into consideration to show that he lacked the specific intent to commit any crime. Not just first-degree murder, any crime, for both of these instructions. Such evidence is to be considered by you only for the purpose of determining whether the defendant's interview was knowingly, voluntarily, and freely made. That's it. All the evidence that you heard from Dr. Scully, from Dr. Olander, the state's rebuttal, with Dr. Zapp and Dr. Goldberger, all that evidence, all of that goes solely to the defendant's statement, to whether you should consider that statement. That's it. It should not and must not enter into your discussions or thought process determining whether or not he's guilty, with the exception of whether you're going to consider his statement. That's all it goes to, determining whether his statement was knowingly, voluntarily, and freely made. I'll tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, take his statement for a minute. You go back to that jury room and ask yourselves, before I even consider that statement, before I even consider or discuss the testimony from those doctors, if the state of Florida has proven this case to you beyond any reasonable doubt before you even consider this statement, I would suggest to you, you don't even have to consider it. You don't even have to discuss the testimony of those 4 doctors. If we prove it to you beyond any reasonable doubt through all the other evidence in this case, and I would submit to you, even without this statement, the evidence is overwhelming. Then you don't have to consider their testimony. Let's take that portion of the instructions, let's take his statement, set it aside. Set it aside and look at all the other evidence in this case for a minute. I'm going to come back to that and argue to you later on why you ought to consider it. But if the evidence has convinced you beyond any reasonable doubt, independent of that statement, you don't even have to consider, discuss, or talk about it. Dr. Olander, Dr. Zapp, Dr. Scully Danziger, and Dr. Goldberg. Now, what are the elements that the state of Florida have to prove to you in these counts? I'm going to start first. I'll refer to them as the simpler counts, the fleeing count and the resisting violence count. Fleeing to elude, I have the instruction on that. Fleeing to elude a law enforcement officer, siren and lights activated, high speed and reckless driving. You've seen the camera, both the one in-dash camera and the helicopter video. You've heard the description from all the officers involved. Elements here, and this is what the state has to prove, it's the elements of each crime beyond any reasonable doubt. The state must prove the following 4 elements beyond a reasonable doubt. Brandon Lee Bradley was operating a motor vehicle. Brandon Lee Bradley knowing that he had been directed to stop by a duly authorized law enforcement officer, willfully fled in the vehicle or in an attempt to elude a law enforcement officer. The law enforcement officer was in an authorized law enforcement patrol vehicle with agency insignia and other jurisdictional markings prominently displayed on the vehicle and sirens and lights activated. During the course of the fleeing or attempt to elude, Brandon Lee Bradley drove at a high speed or in any manner demonstrating a wanton disregard for the safety of persons or property. Back, remember testimony you had from Sergeant Schaefer, the initial officer, first one behind the defendant, Officer Cooper, second patrol car, the one that had the video, the helicopter, the star video, Officer Ron, Officer Amius, put all of their testimony together. You know the defendant was driving. It's clearly Sergeant Schaefer, Officer Cooper both had their lights on, sirens activated. High speed, they described to you the speed he was going. The reckless driving, the wanton disregard, running the stop signs, almost going into oncoming traffic. He's driving by the road at high speed, forcing the other vehicles off the roadway. Submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, without any question, fleeing and eluding is proven in this case. Resisting an officer with violence, Brandon Lee Bradley knowingly, willfully resisted, obstructed, or opposed Deputy Barbara Hill by offering to do violence to her. At the time, Deputy Barbara Hill was engaged in the lawful execution of a legal duty. That means simply, ladies and gentlemen, making the traffic stop. Heard the information, heard the 911 call, information's put out, tag number, related back to the theft property from the hotel, striking the maintenance man. She makes the stop, she's pursuing, she's in the execution of her legal duty, doing what she's supposed to be doing, investigating the crime, making the traffic stop. At the time, Barbara Hill was an officer, so there was no debate about that. You've seen the video. She's in a patrol car, lights on, in uniform. At the time, Brandon Bradley knew Barbara Hill was an officer. You've seen the video. There's no way not to know. He knew. He's having a conversation with her. Submit to you, ladies and gentlemen. That's been proven. We go next into the robbery, and then into first-degree murder. The robbery leads into one of the 2 theories for first-degree murder, that being the felony. robbery is, you're going to give us a 2-page instruction. The elements that Brandon Lee Bradley took the property from the person or custody of Andrew Jordan, Muhammad Malik. Remember, the principle applies. It really doesn't matter between Brandon Bradley and Andrew Kirchner which one took the property. If the principle theory applies. And also, it's from the custody of Andrew Jordan, Muhammad Malik. Instruction is going to tell you that the taking does not have to be from the person, from the body, or from the actual owner. It's just from the one who's in control. Andrew Jordan is the maintenance man. He tries to stop them. Muhammad Malik is the owner of the hotel. The property is certainly within his control. He owns the property. Force, violence, assault, or putting in fear was used in the course of the taking. The property taken was of some value. Heard the testimony, value, put the list in, the values attached. The taking was with the intent to temporarily or permanently deprive Andrew Jordan, Muhammad Malik of the right to the property and benefit from it, or appropriate the property to somebody else's use. What that simply means is they intended to take the property. Clearly that's what's shown. They actually left with the property. So the key, ladies and gentlemen, element 2, force, violence, assault, putting in fear, was used in the course of the taking. In the course of the taking means that the act occurred prior to or contemporaneous with or subsequent to the taking of the property, and that the act and the taking of the property constitute a continuous series of events. What does that mean? The act occurred prior to violence, assault, putting in fear, was used in the course of the taking. So that act, that's force, violence, assault, property, as somebody's getting their hands on the property, or subsequent to actually taking the property. It's not a defense for a person who's stealing property to say, well, hey, I had my hands on the property before I had to use violence, before I had to put fear in somebody to get away. Doesn't matter whether you have to use that fear before, while you're getting your hands on the property, or actually after you've already taken it. As long as the act and the taking of the property constitute a continuous series of acts or events. Let's go over the robbery. What testimony did you hear concerning that? You heard from Mr. Montesano, the person who was staying in the hotel, whose car was parked right next to the defendant's white SUV in the parking lot. He was actually switching rooms that day, so he was getting ready to move his stuff. What did he tell you? He saw both defendants taking the property out to the white SUV. He saw Andrea Kirchner, the white female, and saw this defendant, Brandon Bradley, and identified him. Saw them both taking the property. Second floor, down the staircase, out to the SUV, parked right next to his vehicle. You heard from Tammy Brown with the cleaning ladies. She sees the property behind the SUV. You've seen the pictures of it. Picture, the nightstand, the drawer. She sees that property. She goes up to the black male. She told you he was getting into the vehicle. His face was away. I didn't get a good look at him. But she says, hey, what's this property doing here? What's he say? Oh, it's mine. And he gets in the vehicle. She knows it's not. You heard from Vanessa McNerney. And you also heard from Andrew Jordan and Muhammad Malik. And as each of them arrived to that vehicle. And you heard Andrew Jordan tell you and the other witnesses, he went to the front of the vehicle. because he wanted to stop them. He's right in front of that hood, the front of the vehicle, times hands on the hood, yelling, "Give us back the property. Give us back the property or we're calling the police." He told you he yelled that several times. The defendant, the length of that hood away, makes eye contact with him. He says, "I'm looking right at him." That's what he's focused on. He's not paying much attention to the girl. In fact, if you look, his photo ID, he got her wrong. He got the defendant right, but he got Andrea Kirchner wrong because that's not who he's worried about. He's worried about the one behind that driver's wheel. In this vehicle that probably weighs 5,000 pounds, this SUV. He's trying to stop them. And ultimately, he pulls out his cell phone, hands it to Mr. Mallett, and 911 is called, and you heard that phone call. But what happens while he's in front of that vehicle? What does he tell you? He's standing there, Brandon Bradley starts it, and then comes forward a few inches. A little forward motion after he started, puts his gear and goes forward. What does Andrew Jordan tell you at that point? He's afraid. He's afraid of getting run over. Whether that SUV runs him over when it's going 2 miles an hour, or if it ran him over if it was going 20, it's still 5,000 pounds running over him. So he puts his hands down on the hood and pushes himself off to get out of the way, to avoid being hit, to avoid being run over. He's in fear. Right then and there is when this theft escalated to a robbery. Force, violence, assault, or putting in fear was used in the course of the taking. Because if Andrew Jordan doesn't move, they don't get away unless they're going to run right over him. If he doesn't move, they're stuck there. So when this defendant had that car go forward, lurch forward, that put Andrew Jordan in fear, which caused him to jump out of the way. So this defendant, Brandon Bradley, could drive away, could escape, could get away. They know the police are called. They told them they were calling the police. They're on the cell phone calling them. On the phone with the 911 operator. Mr. Brandon Bradley has to get away. Because he knows if he's still there when the police arrive, he has these warrants. He's stealing property. He's going to jail. So what does he do? He puts Mr. Jordan in fear. As Mr. Jordan is pushing out of the way, he doesn't quite get out of the way in time, and the vehicle brushes his side. You heard that from Mr. Jordan. You heard that from Mr. Mallett. No question it brushed him. Certainly that's the use of force to get away. But the robbery has already occurred. If Mr. Jordan had been lucky enough to get completely out of the way, it would still be a robbery. Because he still used fear. That threat of force, putting Mr. Jordan in fear, that is what a robbery is. It's a theft with that threat. He's guilty of the robbery. Right into the murder case. What's going to tell you there are 2 ways to prove first-degree murder: premeditated murder or first-degree felony. Either one leads you to the result guilty of first-degree murder. You can all be unanimous on one theory, you can all be unanimous on the other theory, or you can be split. As long as everybody agrees the defendant's guilty of first-degree murder, your verdict is guilty of first-degree murder. Half can say the state's proven premeditated murder to me, half can say the state's proven felony murder. As long as all agree on first-degree murder, that's your verdict. In this case, I would submit the evidence proves either to me. I'm going to go over those with you. What I want to cover with you is the court reads to you the homicide instruction. She's going to cover a couple of defenses in there. First is what's called excusable homicide. Killing of a human being is excusable and therefore lawful under any of the following three circumstances. When the killing was committed by accident and misfortune, and doing any lawful act by lawful means with usual ordinary caution without any unlawful intent, clearly does not apply. It's not accident, misfortune, defendant's not doing the lawful act. When the killing occurs by accident and misfortune in the heat of passion upon any sudden and sufficient provocation, none of that here. Killing is not an accident or misfortune. You don't fire 8 shots by accident within 2 feet of somebody. There's no heat of passion. When the killing is committed by accident, misfortune resulting from sudden combat, if a dangerous weapon is not used and the killing is not done in a cruel and unusual manner, again, it doesn't apply. It's not by accident. It's not, killing is not by misfortune, and there's no sudden combat. Excusable homicide doesn't apply. The court's going to read to you justifiable homicide. Set one sentence and then go into the lengthy explanation of it, justifiable use of deadly force, which is what people commonly know as and refer to self-defense. It's a 3-page instruction. I'm going to cover a couple paragraphs with you that will explain to you what I would submit common sense tells you that you already know. There is no self-defense in this case, period. I'm going to cover this, what's required for it, but then there's going to be 2 paragraphs here. However, the use of deadly force is not justified if you find Brandon Lee Bradley was attempting to committing, or escaping after the commission of a robbery. When you're a fleeing felon, you don't get to use self-defense, period. It doesn't matter who's there. He's a fleeing felon. He's fleeing from that scene of that robbery. Self-defense wouldn't apply no matter who was killed. A person is not justified in using force to resist an arrest by a law enforcement officer or to resist a law enforcement officer who is engaged in the execution of a legal duty. If the law enforcement officer was acting in good faith and he or she is known or reasonably appears to be a law enforcement officer. Again, what was Deputy Hill doing? Executing her legal duty. Doing what she's paid to do, what she's sworn to do. Was she acting in good faith? Absolutely. You had the tag number, you had the vehicle, it's fled from that motel in County Lodge, York Inn. She's acting in good faith, she's doing what she's supposed to do, stopping that vehicle. Does she reasonably appear to be a law enforcement officer? No question about that. In a car, siren, lights, uniform. Self-defense does not apply, period. First-degree murder. I'm going to start with felony murder first. Then I'm going to go into the premeditated murder. Remember, the court is going to tell you 2 ways that we can prove this. They're both first-degree murder. felony murder. To prove the crime of first-degree felony murder, the state must prove the following three elements beyond a reasonable doubt. Barbara Hill is dead. Death occurred as a consequence of and while Brandon Lee Bradley was escaping from the immediate scene of a robbery. And Brandon Lee Bradley was the person who actually killed Deputy Hill. In order to convict a first-degree felony murder, it is not necessary that the state prove that the defendant had a premeditated design or intent to kill. So let's look at these elements. No question Barbara Hill is dead. The defendant, is he the one who did the killing? Let's submit principal theory applies here regardless, but in this case the evidence overwhelmingly, I would submit, proves to you Brandon Bradley's the one who pulled that trigger 8 times. Who's the driver? Look at the evidence of who did the killing. First question is who's driving? Every witness from that hotel told you who was in the driver's seat. Every employee of that hotel, the owner, Mr. Malik, to a T, everyone told you which one got behind the driver's wheel, which one got into the passenger seat. Brandon Bradley in the driver's wheel, behind that wheel, in the driver's seat, the black male, Andrea Kirchner into the passenger seat, the white female. Everyone told you that. What does Trista Lohman tell you? Remember her vehicle and out of the back seat. Paying attention to what's happening because she's got a traffic stop right there next to her. What does she tell you? The black male is the driver. Not in a position she can make an identification, but she knows black male in the driver's seat, white female in the passenger seat. What does Barbara Hill tell you? What do you hear from her on her video statement? What is she telling you through her radio traffic? That she has a black man driving. And you can hear her as she walks up to that white SUV, as she gets to the position where she can now see the passenger side and that passenger seat. What does she radio in? I have a white female passenger as well. There is no, I submit, no question who is behind that driver's wheel, who is on the passenger seat. We look at the chase. Look at the testimony from Officer Rao and Officer Ames when they're throwing out their stop sticks. Who's the driver? Who's the passenger? Again, they're not in a position where they can make an ID, but they're in a position where they can tell that it's the black male in the driver's seat, white female in the passenger seat. Every witness tells you that, including Andrea Kirchner, that it's this defendant, Brandon Bradley, who's driving. You saw the video. Passenger moving over. That firearm at that door, with that door open. And you saw the slow motion video. Again, you can actually control it and slow it down even more. When you slow it down, you can actually see the hand, the arm, and the firearm. Not the greatest of quality, this is just a dash cam video, but you can actually see it and you can see the recoil over and over 8 times. You look at that video in slow motion, and you look at the still photographs, we've put them all in, the key 6 seconds, and you can look and go through them one at a time. You can see the one that's listed 014, you can see the gun. You can go through these when you look at it in slow motion, and you can see that's the movement. When you look at number 13, you look at number 14. When you look at these, ladies and gentlemen, you can tell, you can see through that little sliver, the front windshield. What you can see is not only the firearm being black and dark, but you can see below where the firearm would be, the portion of the arm. And you can see it, and you can see Barbara Pill's skin really white. And when you look at the rest of that, look at this in conjunction with the slow motion video. You can actually see the gun is dark, and what's just below the gun is also dark. It tells you without any question, Brandon Bradley's hand is on your gun. Brandon Bradley's hand and fingers that's pulling that trigger. The video shows you without any question, I would submit what you already know from all the other evidence, that Brandon Lee Bradley is the shooter. You know that from Jeffrey Diegas, and you know that from Andrea Kirchner, from their testimony. Andrea Kirchner told you it was Brandon Bradley's gun. He's the one who always possessed it. He's the one who shot and killed Deputy Pill. Jeffrey Diegas told you from what he could hear, remember he's the one on the open line, that it's Brandon Bradley saying, "I've got to kill her." His words were, "I've got to kill the bitch. She's seen my face, she's seen my tag." And it's Andrea Kirchner, he says, the voice that he knows, that's pleading with him, begging him not to do it. How else do you know who it is? Whose gun is it? You heard the evidence. You bought the gun back in December. Bought the gun, heard the identification through the photograph, put the defendant's DL photo in. It's his gun. What also do you have? Under the prints, DP2 and DP5, taken off the plastic ammo tray that's inside the platinum ammo box with 3 rounds of live ammunition, 40 caliber in it. Whose prints are on this plastic tray? On the tray that holds live ammo? Heard from Virginia Casey, without any question, this defendant's prints on the box with the live ammo. You heard Stephanie Cooper, who took those prints, but also swabbed the firearm. And what did she say? She swabbed amongst the areas, one swab, the trigger, and the textured area, the grip. Right where a person who's holding the gun, you would expect to find his DNA. And what did Corey Crumley tell you? Whose DNA is on the trigger? It's not Andrea Kirchner's. She's excluded. Impossible. Cannot be hers. Whose DNA is on the trigger? This defendant, Brandon Lee Bradley. What are the odds another black man would happen to be there in that vehicle? A random black man who had the same DNA? 1 in 35 quadrillion. That's a 1 with 15 zeros to follow. I'd submit to you there aren't even close to that many people in the world. Brandon Bradley's DNA is on the trigger. He's the shooter. All the evidence tells you that. Element 2, the death occurred as a consequence of and while the defendant was escaping from the scene of the robbery. Back and look at the evidence. Look at the time frame of what the witnesses told you concerning that. You heard the 911 call for the police. You heard from Deputy Troop saying he responded there as soon as the call came in. He was there within a few minutes. And he's only there for a couple of minutes. Didn't even make it to go into the hotel room when he hears the call from Deputy Pill that she spotted the vehicle. And the Deputy Pill turns around and is going to go stop the vehicle. And all the hotel witnesses told you this was right at checkout time, 11 o'clock. Right close to that hour. You saw from Deputy Pill's camera that it comes on at 11:07. If you recall from the testimony that when the lights are activated, the camera records the prior 30 seconds. So when it kicks on at 11:07, that's 30 seconds before she's turned on her lights to stop the vehicle. Deputy Troop told you that he went to assist her as soon as he heard that she had spotted the vehicle. So he's already leaving and is on his way. It says once Deputy Pill radios in that the vehicle is not stopping right away, that's when he tells you, I up my response. That's when he kicks on his sight. And his video starts recording. And you saw through his video the traffic, the lights he had to go through, the construction that was in the area. You heard from Agent Reynolds that he measured it, and the distance from the hotel to Elena Way, 3.5 miles. And you know by the time Deputy Hill spots this white SUV, it's not traveled the full 3.5 miles, it's a little bit less. It hasn't made it to Elena Way quite at that point. This is all happening within minutes of their fleeing from that hotel, from New York Inn, from the scene of the robbery. Andrea Kirchner told you they hadn't stopped anywhere. They hadn't reached any safe haven. They were still in the act of fleeing. They were still in the act of escaping from the scene of that robbery. That's what felony murder is. They're still in the act of that robbery. They haven't gotten away with it. This is not something that happened a day or 2 days later, or even hours later. It's minutes after. They're still fleeing, escaping from the scene of that robbery. The death occurred as a consequence of, and while Brandon Bradley was escaping from the immediate scene of the robbery. Barbara Pill is dead because she's the one who stopped him. She's the one who stops him from fleeing from that robbery scene. I submit whatever officer was going to stop him would be dead. He was going to kill whatever officer stopped him. First-degree felony murder. No question Barbara Hill is dead. No question Brandon Lee Bradley is the person who pulled the trigger. No question I was meant to place on the evidence. The death of Barbara Hill occurred as a consequence of while the defendant was escaping from the York Inn. Remember, you've seen the aerial photographs and the maps. The York Inn, the Town Lodge, it's right there on 192. Come out of there, make the right, and right there's the left for John Rose Boulevard. And it's a straight shot down John Rose Boulevard to where Langland is at. And that's the road that they're seeing. That's the road where Deputy Hill sees the vehicle as they're getting away, escaping from that hotel. Premeditated murder. To prove the crime of first-degree premeditated murder, the state must prove the following three elements beyond a reasonable doubt. Barbara Hill is dead. The death was caused by the criminal act of Brandon Lee Bradley, and there was a premeditated killing of Barbara Hill. Showing you Barbara Hill is dead. I've already went over the evidence. The death was caused by the criminal act of Brandon Lee Bradley. There was a premeditated killing of Barbara Hill. All this killing is premeditation. The court's going to tell you on this instruction, killing with premeditation is killing after consciously deciding to do so. The decision must be present in the mind at the time of the killing. The law does not fix an exact period of time that must pass between the formation of the premeditated intent to kill and the killings. The period of time must be long enough to allow reflection by the defendant. The premeditated intent to kill must be formed before the killing. What does that mean? It means premeditated intent does not have to be done the day before or hours before. There's no exact time or exact period of time that must pass between having the intent and doing the killing. All that has to be is enough time to allow reflection. Enough time, I would submit, reflection is to know what you're going to do. You haven't thought about it. To decide, I'm going to kill with enough time to think, yes, I am. That's reflection. There's no planning of hours in advance, lying in wait required. That certainly would be premeditation, but it's not law. It's not what required. Have the intent before the killing, before pulling that trigger, having that intent, and having enough time to have reflection. That's premeditation. What shows you the premeditation in this case? First, the defendant acquired the gun. I said weeks earlier, it's actually Robert Marks. We heard the testimony, he got that firearm, the murder weapon, back in December. Heard the testimony from Robert Marks. He took it out of his brother-in-law's car, out of the glove box. Heard the testimony, but that's where it was kept at when it came up missing. You've seen the paperwork IDing it up as the same serial number. You heard from the agent who interviewed Robert Marks and actually showed him a picture of Brandon Bradley. You got that picture into evidence. You got a copy of Mr. Bradley's driver's license photo in evidence. You also have photo lineups in evidence. Remember the agent told you, Agent Carson, we used the one that we had released. We used the one, if you look at it, Looks pretty darn similar, if not exact, to one of the photo lineups. You look at the defendant's driver's license photos, there's no question that's him. That's who Robert Marks said that's who I sold the gun to. You have Amanda Osborne. Sminty, ladies and gentlemen, certainly be lucked. Her testimony still cares about the defendant. What did she tell you? She told you that he had the gun. She knew him to carry a gun. She told you she was with him in late 2012 when they saw several police officers. And the defendant got all nervous. She told you that he told her he knew about his warrants, what he would do. You heard the evidence from Charles Cologne, the defendant's probation officer, that he put violation of probation warrants out, that the defendant had stopped reporting to probation, which obviously is going to get a warrant out for your arrest. You have to report the elements of probation. So when somebody doesn't report, stops going in, they know, even if you had no other evidence, that he knew. That fact alone would tell you that he knew he had warrants out for his arrest. But you have the testimony from Amanda Osborne, that defendant knew about his warrants. He also had the other warrants out for his arrest. You've seen those. All evidence of premeditation. He has those warrants out. Andrea Purchase pleading with him, telling him, you don't have to do it. How much more evidence of reflection can you have than a discussion about it? A discussion about the killing. That's reflection. She saw my tag, she saw my face, I got to kill her. The defense is going to argue, oh, you can't believe Mr. Diegas. You can't believe him at all. He's done drugs. He's got prior felony convictions. Not really a surprise there. People who will be involved in drugs, you'd certainly expect them to have felony convictions. It'd be shocking if they didn't. It's a factor you'll look at, as we talked about from voir dire. But the other things the court's going to tell you, weighing the evidence, is that the witness's testimony is really the other evidence. Do they appear to be in a place or in a spot where they can see and hear the things that they testified to? What do we know about Mr. Diegas? He's on the other end of that phone. And that phone, that call was not terminated. It was not ended at the time of the traffic stop and at the time of the defendant's killing of Barbara Hill. The phone records show you that. The phone call happened at 10:48 and went on for 32 minutes.
It is an open line during the time of the killing. Mr. Dieguez is in a place where he can hear the things he testified to. He's on the other end of that phone line. What did he tell the defense on cross-examination? All of his other issues and all of his other problems. I am never going to forget this as long as I live. You know he's listening to it. The phone line is open. And what does he tell you? Some of the little details? He hears the burp, burp, the silent. Not the classic silent. When you hear on TV, woo, just that little burp. What do you hear on the video? That's what you hear. That's what you hear. And that's what Mr. Dieguez told you that he heard. Those are the things that you can look to say that testimony is reliable. And compare it to all the other evidence. Compare it to the phone line. You know he's able to hear it. What does Andrea Kirch tell you? She tells you the defendant had the gun. That he had the gun for the time frame she was with him. That he usually kept it on him in his vest pocket or right close in here. But it's his gun. How do we know that? How can you believe her? Look at the other evidence. Look at the testimony from Robert Marks. Look at the prints that are on that tray holding the live ammunition. And look at whose DNA is on that firearm. She tells you the same. The defendant says, I'm not going back to prison. I will do whatever I have to do. I'm going to kill that cracker. And what does Andrea Kirchner tell you that she does? She pleads with him not to do it. That he didn't need to do it. Consistent with what Jeffrey Dieguez is telling you. Choice of words may differ slightly, but they're telling you the same thing that this defendant is saying and what Andrea Kirchner is saying back to him. You don't need to do it. Baby, don't do it. That lays out premeditation to a T. That's reflection. That's time to reflect. That's all that's needed is time to reflect. When you're having a discussion about it, when you have somebody trying to talk you out of doing it, that's premeditation. Finally, what do the shots tell you about premeditation, about his intent? Is this one shot to the leg, one shot to the foot? Well, I'll just wound her. That'll give me time to get away. There's just two shots to the leg to try to wound her. Maybe he had some freak ricochet. But they're just trying to do it to get away. Just going to wound her? No. These are 8 shots. You know it's 8 because you have all the spent casings. 7 at the scene, 1 found in the vehicle. You have the 10-round magazine, 1 round still in it, 1 round still in the firearm when it's recovered. You have 8 shots. You have the 2 in the door. You have the 1 that went over to the grass area. You have the 1 that looks like it hit the vest. And then you had, as Dr. Kaiser testified to, 5 entrance wounds, but appeared to be from 4 shots. 8 shots. You heard from the ballistics expert from FDLE. All those casings are fired from that weapon. The projectiles that could be matched came from that weapon. And that weapon, you heard her talk about the trigger pull. Over 6 pounds, I think she said 6.5 to 6 3/4, if I remember correctly. A normal trigger pull. It's not a light trigger. It's not an easy trigger. It's not a feather trigger. It's not something that you're just going to accidentally touch the trigger and it goes off. It's a normal trigger pull. And it's not a gun where you pull the trigger once and every shot comes out. You have to keep pulling that trigger time and time again. And what does this defendant do? Not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 8 times. And you can see it in that still video, in the slow motion video, and in those still photographs. From the autopsy, she's within 2 feet. You only get back if you're within 2 feet. She's 2 feet away from him when he pulls that gun up and points and pulls the trigger. And you saw the wound, the death wound on the top of the head. The Dr. Kaiser talked to you about it, and he says, well, it's back to front, but downward. May have been slightly confusing, but if you think about it, all he's trying to tell you is back to front means the path of that bullet went from the back portion to the front portion. And if you look at the side of the head, you can see where the wound is on the top of the head. All back to front means is that's at an angle where the travel goes more towards the front than the back. Doesn't mean it's in the back of the head. We showed you the pictures, and you've seen where it's at, both from this picture and the other one, the angle from the top. All that means is the path is on a path that goes towards the forward part of the body, downward and back to front. And where are the other wounds? Where is Deputy Pill hit? Entrance wound, upper arm. Entrance wound, high back, low neck. Entrance wound, high back. As she's spinning, turning, falling, she's being hit. She's being burned. Where are these wounds being fired at? They're not at the leg. They're not at the foot. They're not at the knee. They're at the head and the high part of the body. These are shots to kill. These aren't shots to warn. These aren't shots to wound. These are not shots to just put somebody down by shooting them in the foot. These are shots to kill. The old saying, actions speak louder than words. What is his intent? What does he intend to do? What is his premeditation? Look at the shots. 8 pounds from a distance within 2 feet. At the head, to the chest. screams to you premeditation. Screams to you premeditation. He's intended to kill her. He's not going back to prison. The gentleman talked about early on the defendant's statement. Submit to you the evidence that I went over, and submit proves beyond any reasonable doubt both theories of first-degree murder, felony murder, and premeditated. And if the evidence independent of his statement proves that to you, I say you don't even need to consider it. You don't even need to look at the statement and consider and evaluate the testimony from those doctors. I'm going to go over his statement with you. Again, as I told you, evidence on this bit overwhelming. You don't even have to get to this step. What's the key thing from the instruction the court's going to tell you? Statement claimed to have been made by the defendant outside of court has been placed before you. Such a statement should always be considered with caution and weighed with great weight to make certain it was knowingly, voluntarily, and freely made. Therefore, you must determine from the evidence that the defendant's alleged statement was knowingly, voluntarily, and freely made. In making this determination, you should consider the total circumstances, including, but not limited to, whether when the defendant made the statement he had been threatened in order to get him to make it, and two, whether anyone had promised him anything in order to get him to make it. If you conclude the defendant's out-of-court statement was not knowingly, voluntarily, and freely made, you should disregard it. This is the only area that the condition of involuntary intoxication applied to at all. That's it. Yes to whether you're going to consider this statement. Was it freely, voluntarily, and knowingly made? Were any threats made against him? You heard from all the officers involved. The ones who took him into custody out of that vehicle, up the embankment, the one who transported him to the sheriff's office. You heard from the one who interviewed him. You saw the interview. Never threatened to beat him, never threatened with any physical harm. No promises made, no coercion. We saw in the interview, officers from one, no yelling, no raised voices, no towering, standing over him, yelling at him, trying to intimidate him. His doctors that told you they looked like cordial. Heard about the blood draw, the urine draw from the defendant. In the blood, marijuana and Xanax. In the urine, the hydro, the codone, the cocaine. What did the experts from toxicologists from Woostar, even Dr. Banziger, and certainly Dr. Goldberger told you, what's in the urine could be there for up to days. No way you can look at any of that, what's in the urine, take that leap that somehow is causing him to be impaired. You can't make the leap from what's in the urine, period. You have the marijuana, you have the Xanax. Look at the qualifications of Dr. Scully Danziger versus the qualifications of Dr. Goldberg. He was board certified. He spent his entire career in forensic toxicology. He was the head of the Department of Forensic Medicine and Toxicology at the University of Florida. Dr. Goldberg. He was the one who's published some 70 or 80 articles in peer-reviewed journals, lectures all over the globe. This field. Scully Danziger, initial report. No, there's the codeine. There's the promethazine. What does she do? Second report, testimony. Now I backed off of that. So misread the report or something. Backing off her opinions, making those errors. What does she tell you about the Xanax? Well, 11 hours is the half-life. And I am able to do the retrograde examination and go back in time, and I put his result at 216 or 215, whatever her exact number was. That's what it was at the time of the interview and his waiver. But in the report, she says you can't do it. Exactly. And when questioned, I didn't say that. Well, I guess I did, but I used the term exact here. That's not what I'm doing. I'm doing a rough estimate down to an actual number. That's one heck of a rough estimate. What did Dr. Goldberger tell you? It's not valid. You can't do it. It's not valid science to do that. For a number of reasons. First is that the half-life ranges anywhere from 6 to, I believe he said, 26 hours. The most common in somebody is 11, but you have no idea what a person actually is. It's such a wide range. You need multiple tests over and over to try to measure what the person's metabolic rate is. You can't do it. On top of that, different people are affected in different ways. Different people have different level of usage of the drug. They become more adapted to the drug, better able to handle the effects. Dr. Danziger said, oh, the defendant told me he did 12 pills early in the morning and then 12 pills at the time of the crash. 24 pills, 2 milligram pills, 48. What did Dr. Goldberger tell you about that? There's Dr. Danziger. The defendant told me I'm just running right with it. Dr. Goldberger, that's an unbelievable amount. Unbelievable. What did Dr. Goldberger tell you? He's watched the statement. And it's not slurring. Mumbles his words, not slurring. It's not lethargic, not in a coma-like state. You would expect to see him if he had taken 24 Xanaxes. Normal dosage, 1 to 2. He's clear in his answers. No confusion or difficulty in answering the questions. You've seen the video. You've heard from the agent who interviewed him. His answers were in response to the questions. He's answering on the same subject matter of what he's being asked. They're not asking about something and his answer just comes out of left field on a totally different subject matter. He's able to answer the questions. Doesn't have the confusion or difficulty in doing it. Dr. Goldberger, no scientific evidence. We're the testimony Dr. Olander and Dr. Zapp. They're the ones that focused on voluntary, knowing, and intelligent. Voluntary, no threats, no promises, no coercion. Talked about that, you saw the video, you heard from all the officers. There isn't any of that. Knowing is an understanding. Even with Dr. Olander, well, understanding you implicate yourself. Oh yes, that would be knowing. Did you understand that by talking you may implicate yourself? Or implicate others? Intelligent. That you're able to weigh the information, that you appreciate what you're doing. Look at the interview itself. Look at the specifics of the interview. Look at the things you use your common sense. And look at what the defendant's saying in that meeting. Miranda. They go through it, line by line, step by step. The officer's right there. He has the sheet. The defendant's able to look at it. You know he has a high school graduation, confirming degree, 2.6, 2.7 GPA, a high C, and B- average. You know, probably is a B- average. Graduated at 17, never had to repeat a grade. What does he tell them? Going through, step by step, right by right. You understand? Yeah, I understand. I understand. Look at what happened during the interview itself. There were times, several times, the officer would go to repeat back what he said and he would clarify. Multiple times, Dr. Zapp talked about clarifying his position, clarifying things that the officers state to him, because he knows and understands the importance of his words, of what he's saying. Shows the level of understanding of that importance. Shows the appreciation of his rights. Indicates at one point he could incriminate himself over the gun. Talks about other times he doesn't want to get his girlfriend and baby mama into trouble. Understands that he could incriminate himself or others. He's talking. At approximately 8:21, the time frame of the interview, goes to the officers. Now, don't put words into my mouth. Understands the importance. One point during the interview, Dr. Zapp talked about this. The defendant says, they talked about the time frame. They said from the hotel to the shooting, approximately 20 minutes. He has a concept of time. We're talking at this point now, some 9 hours after the shooting. The interview starts at 7:30, 7:34 or so, 7:33, something in that time frame. Shooting happened at about 11:10. And that's the time we reflected that him. The interview goes for over an hour in various stages. So this many hours afterwards, he still is able to give them an accurate estimate of the time. Does that sound like someone who's so impaired he has no idea what's going on? Look at his physical actions throughout the day. Look at the testimony from the people at the hotel. Mr. Montesano, he was able to carry things, able to navigate the stairs, knew enough to flee from the hotel when they're on the phone with 911 calling the police. He knows enough. I've got warrants, time to get out of Dodge. Not so impaired to not realize, hey, I ought to get out of here. He's able to drive. Not such a coma like stance that he can't drive. Leaves, not wandering around the parking lot, not figuring out how the heck do I get out of here because he's so messed up. Goes right out towards the entrance to the front of the hotel. Makes the turn, heads on John Rhodes Boulevard, going north, getting away from that motel. Look at the testimony from the officers in which you saw on those cams. After the shooting, he knows enough to get the heck out of there. And then he's going down the one road, I think it was Carrollwood, when the other officer, the one officer goes past that intersection and sees him. Makes a quick turnaround, goes back to the road. The defendant's already off the road. Can't find him. Why? Sees him, I presume, in the rearview mirror and says, oh no, I got to get out of here. Again, knows enough to try to hide, to get away. And you've seen the pictures the aerial photograph of where Mr. Weber's house is at. You saw the pictures, the driveway, the tire tracks. You can see the pond. And they told you coming from this driveway area that's right off that road, Carrollwood, around the pond, up to Mr. Weber's house. He has enough wits about him to get the heck off the road, knowing the officers just passed, they're probably coming back. Has enough wits to go down that little driveway, off of that, navigate through that grass, navigate around the pond, and get to the house that has an open garage door, because they know they're going to need gas. You heard from Stephanie Cooper how low the truck was in gas. He's able to do all of that. Then when they finally go to stop him, remember Officer Cooper, I parked my car at a spot to block the road and I threw the stop sticks down, and what does he do? The defendant drives around the grass, around my stop sticks, and around the car. Got enough wits to be able to do all of that. Then you saw on the star camera in Officer Cooper's video, more stop sticks are being thrown by various officers every chance they get. He's trying to maneuver around them. Fortunately, there's enough of them out there and enough signs that he can't miss all of them. But you see him driving around them, trying to. Yet suddenly, 8 hours later, Dr. Danziger, Dr. Olander tell you, he's just too impaired to wave Miranda. He's able to do all these things, up and down stairs, drive, avoid stop sticks, avoid the officers, get out of Dodge. He's just too impaired to wave Miranda. He can't do that knowingly. He's doing everything else knowingly. He knows he has the warrants. What does Dr. Olander tell you? He acquiesces to authority. That's what he acquiesces to authority. Because that's an authority figure in there in that room with him, and he just acquiesces to authority. How much acquiescing did he do to Barbara Hill? The officer in the room, cordial, polite with him, asking him, "You understand these rights? Will you speak with us?" Deputy Pill is ordering him out of that vehicle over and over and over. Come out of the vehicle, step out of the vehicle, come out and talk to me. Over and over and over. When does he acquiesce to authority in that video? Never. Instead, what he does when she gets within 2 feet from her, he shoots her dead. This video, his interview, the person that can do all of that understands his Miranda just like he said. And what does this interview tell you? What does he say in this interview? He doesn't say anything more than what I submit you already know. He doesn't tell you anything more than what all the evidence has already proven to you. His gun, got it from a mason. Heard the testimony from Robert Marks. Tells you he has warrants out for his arrest. Heard the testimony from all the witnesses, Charles Palone, Amanda Osborne, Andrew Kirchner. And you've seen the warrants. You know he knows. He tells you that he knows. He tells you that he's the shooter. You already know that. You heard it from Andrew Kirchner. You can see it in the video. And you know his DNA is the one on the trigger. And he tells you he purposely shot Deputy Bill. He thinks, well, I did it in self-defense. I thought she was trying to shoot me. You know, there is no self-defense here in this case. You know, from the testimony from Deputy Troop that Barbara Hill, and you can see it on the video as well, she never took her gun out of her holster. And Deputy Troop, the holster wasn't even unsnapped. The video tells you what you already know. This defendant is the one on the lane away on March 6, 2012, that gunned down Deputy Hill. He did it because she saw his tag, she saw his face, and she was going to take him back to jail. And he wasn't going. He told people he's not going back. I told people right down there in their Birchland, I'm not going back to jail. I'll do whatever it takes. I'm going to kill the crack. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you hold this defendant accountable and you hold him responsible. His actions, his choices, for his decision to pull that trigger 8 times and murder Margaret. We ask that you find this defendant guilty on all counts, fleeing, resisting with violence, guilty on the property. Ladies and gentlemen, return the verdict, and the evidence proves this defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, at this time it would be appropriate for us to take a 15-minute break. We're going to take a break until 10:35. During this recess, you must continue to abide by the rules governing your service as a juror. Court will be in recess for 15 minutes.
All right.
Okay, please be seated, and we'll be in recess as well. Deputy McCarty, can I see you for just a moment? If you could go on recess.